I mean, this is a futuring environment, so I have one or two futuring exercises for you to do that are quite fun, but that talk about something that's quite hot in futurological circles, apparently called design fiction. I don't know if anybody's heard of the concept of design fiction. Well, it's just a small exercise in design fiction, which we can talk about design fiction at the beginning, and I might need to kind of show. Actually, what I could do is just show that video just now.
Yeah. Show that now.
Yeah. Yeah, just a video that I've got, and then we'll go and do something just slightly more fun. Well, I'll just kind of explain. This is just a very brief video of about 3 minutes, maybe 6 minutes. But one of the things that Nesta is doing, it's launching a paper in March, which is part of our process, which is kind of looking at the relationship between SF, science fiction, and innovation policy. So there's obviously there's the sort of the banal aspects of that, which is the way that science fiction and rocketry, fed into the space program, or actually some quite interesting connections. H.G. Wells was writing about an atom bomb. I can't remember what the name of the novel is, but in 1911, and then Leo Szilard, actually read that, communed with Wells, and that kind of fed into the Manhattan Project. And obviously we have our whole discussion about how the devices of Star Trek, the tricorders, the transcorders, and so forth, have led to our kind of ubiquitous sort of handheld devices at the moment. So, but there's some 2 or 3 papers coming out from Nesta about that, and they're properly sceptical about there being too much of a direct link between science fiction imagining. I mean, there's lots of people, they say, who are tech entrepreneurs who will use science fiction tropes and particular technological images to burnish their pitch, to venture capitalists. A guy will say, in terms of justifying his new bit of medical technology, it's just like Star Trek's tricorder, but it's not really terribly clear that has what's inspired the innovation. Or another classic example is nanotechnology. I mean, some would say it's actually there's about 4 or 5, 6 or 7 different disciplines that line up underneath nanotechnology: materials science and chemistry and so forth and so on. And the very constitution of the field itself is overdetermined by science fiction. The whole idea that we will have that level of control over material nature is a pitch for funding that may not necessarily be justified by the scientific practice itself. So there's lots of very interesting work done on this. But one of the things that they sort of focus on as a way for innovation processes in state and economy can have a relationship to the kind of things that science fiction does, is a process that they're beginning to call sort of design fiction. And this has come out of various places, as direct as DARPA, the American Defense Advanced Projects Agency, bringing in science fiction writers to do scenarios with them. Intel with something called the Tomorrow Project, where they'll directly commission SF writers to work with particular technical potentialities within particular objects. All the way to sort of people, Dunn and Raby in the Royal College of Art, who do what they call critical design, which is not so out there that it's weird and rejectable and crazy, but not so boring that it just seems like a trade show, that it just makes you, they do critical design fictions that make you uncomfortable with the actual complement and weight and affordance of design technology in your lives. Now, I suppose what I was quite interested to hear from, I guess, as a transdisciplinary group, is a kind of a response to this example of design fiction. And I just think it's interesting because it's good to have a kind of political consciousness about this, because this is sort of an example of what the participants would hope was a really harmonious relationship between an NGO, a green think tank, and a large, kick-ass consumer electronics corporation, Sony. So this is a thing they did called. Has anybody seen this before? Sony Futurescapes? No. Usual Horizon 2025. What would the world look like? They actually did this with a think tank called Forum for the Future. Has anybody heard of Forum for the Future? Yeah. Jonathan Porritt, I think, kicked him off, and they're a kind of technology friendly or technology literate green sustainability think tank, and they basically provided the intellectual firepower for this. But I think it's really it's sort of interesting the tight ambit of the scenarios that they paint, because it all has to do. The device has to be, as it were, at the centre of the narrative. There has to be some device element involved. Otherwise, Sony, it doesn't brighten Sony's internal intelligence or their strategic wisdom or any aspect of their business operation. But what I wanted to do, again, I want a reaction on the level of a qualitative reaction, critical reaction, really on the level of how plausible these things are. I mean, I just think it's fascinating in terms of business sociology that a lot of money has been spent on this. Unilever will sponsor the Turbine Hall at Tate Modern, or Volkswagen will sponsor the Fun Factory and show people running up and down piano-enabled staircases in Stockholm and so forth. There has to be some interest or perceived bottom line benefit from large organisations investing in public displays of future literacy, and it'd be quite nice to kind of unpick that for just 20-25 minutes in terms of what they're doing. So I'll show you. I'll do the sort of the most extreme, actually the most excruciating ones. The first one, which just drives me mental, not this one, that one. Oops, hold on. The machine is deciding to act in a way that I didn't want it to act. You stop. There we are, hyper innovation. Now it's 3 minutes 16. It may end up feeling like 31 minutes, but believe me, it's only 3 minutes. It's only 3 minutes 16.
When I do have kids, I will definitely need an auto nanny.
Okay.
Why do they employ proper actors for this?
Yes.
And just there's the paragraph on this is: this low carbon world has been created by a rapid and ceaseless process of technological innovation. Lifestyles and business practices have been minimally affected, but against the background of diminishing resources, there is growing concern about the long-term sustainability of this innovation treadmill approach. Right. So that's one vibe. Right. I'll go to the other one, which is centralized survival. It's stunned into a belated response by a series of severe climate shocks. Governments have taken tough measures to combat climate change, pushing technology to its limits to impose sustainability on the population and provide some relief from restrictions on personal freedom. Okay, remember me.
Work a bit less and start trading in carbon. Well, what with a new arrival coming?
The other two, I'm obviously not going to play the other two scenarios, but they're obviously refinements on that shared ownership, prosperity redefined. You can watch them at your own leisure. It really is to kind of to show the limitations of the aspiration of some of the design fiction techniques and hopes, for what it could do, or what relationship it could broker, between SF imagining and actual sort of, business practice. I mean, one of the interesting things that some of the Nesta researchers say when they look at the relationship between the two is that science fiction is really good, is really bad at warding off undesirable futures, but it's quite good at promoting, at puffing up things that we think are desirable. So, for example, the amount of the amount of nuclear Holocaust SF literature and imagery that there has been that simply hasn't made a damn difference, you know, to nuclear proliferation, you know. But you know, the whole William Gibson's concept of cyberspace, you know, is something that, you know, clearly has been a kind of a very, very dominant trope that's actually given a whole field of ecology of technology makers a place to a territory to occupy, or a territory to fill up, to kind of colonise, you know.
But what happens with science fiction is we kind of retrofit the ones that are closest to what we're actually living in. And
yes,
say
that's
how
right.
predictive it was, you know, but there are thousands that people have forgotten that don't get anywhere near it. So.
And I think the interesting thing, it was if you look back at science fiction imaging from, say, the 50s or the 60s, you know, the whole idea of a flying car is quite interesting, because cars were the kind of no one really predicted smart network devices. That really wasn't part of the imaginary. So people were reading forward from where we were promised jetpacks. Is the great joke. So I do think it's quite an interesting exercise to just imagine what it is that we can't possibly imagine 40 years hence, in terms of, you know, a banal everyday tech. I mean, it does feel to me, you know, that I mean, certainly if you do a timeline exercise and you go back to 1964, you know, or 1963, if you were going forward to 2063, if you were taking that leap back and forward. You know, there are driverless trains, you know, in New York at that time. You know, Rachel Carson is about to bring out Silent Spring. You know, there's telecommunications satellites. You know, the McLuhan's about to bring out the Mechanical Bride. You know, when one thinks about a whole set of sort of continuities of discussions about the impact of technology in science and society, there would seem to be as much continuity as there is discontinuity. So it's an interesting question to think forward in terms of 50 years or 40 years, what the continuities and what the discontinuities might actually be. I mean, and I can't imagine that there will not be some kind of, it feels like there's some kind of trajectory along the cyborg line. I mean, it does sort of feel that there are going to be some, you know, boundaries or taboos broken or norms established, you know, about about the body surface of humans, the wiring, the kind of neuronal wiring of humans, and what happens on the outside. But I think it's quite an interesting thing to play around with what genuinely breaks that taboo. It's also quite interesting to think about ends that haven't happened. She's there talking about her smart clothing. Now, I think it's actually, smart clothing is incredibly doable right now.
Oh, yes.
And I think it's very interesting as to why we're not all sitting around with signifying. We're all signifying anyway, of course, you know, but why we're not all, you know, billboarding, or why we don't all sit in a situation where we presume that we're going to have smart clothing that signifies or monitors our body. You know, it's doable, but it's not come about yet. So I think there might be some interesting recalcitrant, you know, dimensions of the human condition. But then there might also be some completely exponential ones. I mean, it may be the case that there are certain things that I mean, along the line of mutual mentation, along the line of intersubjectivity, there might be things that we absolutely gasp for, you know, in terms of communing with your loved ones. How more deeply could our love relationship be if it was literally, you know, neuron to neuron, you know, instantaneous thought and feeling to instant. You know, maybe people would go there as a desirable extreme. Maybe the idea of being an ego is actually, you know, really, other than just Buddhism, but actually technologically, you know. So I think it's just a kind of that's to me that. In curating this event, I've tried to make myself as interested in those who say we're moving from high tech to high touch. You know, that the analog and the organic is important. You know, as interested in them as I've been interested in those who think that, you know, nature is now a disassemblable Lego set. You know, that we can push and pull around. Because I suppose I'm genuinely, from a play perspective, wondering, you know, what it is that I have to be ready for. Neil Stevenson is also doing this thing. I can't remember what university it's with, but it's called something like the Hieroglyph Project, where he wants science fiction writers to return to the whole Hugo Gernsback idea that the point of science fiction is to educate a generation of young engineers, you know, for whom, you know, they need to feel emotional about certain realizable technological goals. So they look at, you know, the robot, you know, as a hieroglyph, you know, as a clear symbol or a domain of innovation that people can agree on, you know, or cheap energy or solar power is another thing that, you know, and he wants science fiction writers to put their shoulders to the wheel and get on with it and help to emotionally motivate an era of necessary radical innovation. So I think I totally agree with you. Neil Stephenson is a beautiful post-Pynchonesque, you know, creator of alternative sensibilities, you know. But the ambivalence of it is quite interesting, you know.
Bruce Sterling did that though, didn't he?
Yes, he
did. USC School of Design, I think it was.
That's right. Yeah.
No.
That's right. But meme has, and I think it's quite interesting. Yeah, the meme has, and which almost serves roughly. Well, it's not exactly the same function, but it is about, and which the meme sounds like ideology. You know, the way we used to talk about ideology, you know, sort of 20, you know, 40, 50 years ago, you know. So, I mean, again, I think it's interesting in terms of design fiction. I am interested in the kind of Thomas Kuhn point about what, you know, where are the legitimate paradigms for science that counts, you know, in any particular circumstance, you know. I mean, I know there are quite a lot. There's a guy called Nicholas Rose. If you know the work of Nicholas Rose, but he's at the LSE and he's a sociologist, Foucault guy. But he really looks at life sciences and sees this end of the nature-nurture divide. You know, and looking at things like epigenetics and looking at how, you know, the selfish gene image is not adequate, you know, to explaining how, you know, how change happens, biological change happens in an organism. You know, and he sees a real frontier. For instance, he sees a real frontier for social science. I don't know if we would call it necessarily. You might call it biosocial science or something. But he sees a frontier for explanation. You know, but on the level of, you know, how do we is there actually again a closer relationship between biological understanding and social category that wards off going down the eugenics route? You know, I mean, it's just very, very difficult to think through some of these spaces, and it's quite interesting. Science fiction, I think, is really helpful at releasing us from the anxiety about that. I mean, there are huge anxieties about how to get biotechnology regulation right, you know. So this is a very simple but very fun exercise in design fictioning I've asked you to do. It comes off a guy called Adrian Hon, who's a game designer in London, and he basically, this is a very pet project of his. It's called The History of the Future in 100 Objects, inspired by the Neil McGregor Radio 4 show. He funded the whole process on Kickstarter, raised about £9,000 in a matter of weeks. And he is not just a games designer, but he was also a neuroscientist. So I think he has a kind of very sort of cutting edge interest in all manners of technological innovation as it affects humans and human codes and behaviours. And he just took this simple idea, the simple trope, which I've asked you to play around with, of an object that would tell a story about some scenario that would happen over the next 100 years, something before 2100. He would take a glass of water and say, first glass of water mined from an asteroid. He would pull off his wedding ring and say, first wedding ring from a marriage of an AI and a human. He would take a piece of stone and a piece of shrapnel and say, here's the first piece of shrapnel from a bomb between two warring Southeast Asian powers. A pair of aviator glasses, here are the smart glasses that averted a war because of the information that came into the specs. So I asked you all to do the same exercise, and I didn't give you very long, and you didn't even need very long to come up with an object and a story about the object. I think what's interesting, one of the things that Adrian has talked about is the tension between the special object and the banal object. It's great fun to come up with the idea that a glass of water comes from an asteroid, but sometimes his imagination wanted to run riot and imagine an almost unimaginable object that would just be banal in the future. So I guess you've sort of run around those poles as well. And it's just been a nice example of working your environment, you know, in a very animalistic, advanced mammal, playful kind of way. So I'm going to ask whoever is the leader of each group to come up and basically show their object to the future and tell the story. Who's first? You go first.
This is a new material called BioBuild, and it has saved many, many lives, particularly in war zones and refugee camps. It is a simple flat surface that is shaped but comes flat packed, and there are microbes embedded in the material which will grow under the influence of sunlight and actually form the depth of the material. So it weighs nothing to take to a zone, it flat packs, and then you simply bend it, put it in the sun, and it builds itself. And it's modular, so you can bolt it together very easily.
And what's this human story behind it? What has it helped, or what has it alleviated? What is it?
Well, in terms of instant shelters in very difficult terrain where transport's an issue, this has become a real lifesaver. It's the thing that has replaced tents, and it's thermally insulated, so it works in the cold nights in the desert and so on.
What date is that?
This is 2020. This was
quite modest. All right, cool, okay. Well, indeed, 2020. Right, who's next?
And actually, the only reason this is an object is because it's been determined that this is really human beings still need the object as a portal into what is really a system, a whole worldwide ecology of teaching systems, right? So it's an instructional portal in a sense, but it's a guide that's informed by complete understanding of developmental sense of human beings, both biological, learning, perhaps spiritual, can sense the state of the individual, both in terms of the long-term tracking and that then and there now, psychological state, biochemical state, maybe a subtle energy state, and out of that is continually guiding the learning of the individual and guiding them, pointing them, directing them to accessing the whole world of information that's available to optimize their learning.
So it's a mystic portal.
It's a deep mystic learning portal, yes. And of course, it's still able to take any individual where they are and bring them to optimize the capacity across full broad range of learning trajectories. And that ends up connecting and being involved with a whole system that connects with employment needs around the world, and is for the first time enabled truly dynamic individual matching of people with job opportunities that as they arise, 5-week job here, mixed portfolio, deeply matched to the learning process they've been through, what's been optimized based on their individual capacities. And can also say, there's an opportunity coming out there, arising in the world of labor that's needed, and it can start optimizing a person, giving them the option of developing in towards that direction and towards this upcoming new need in the world.
So it's a de-alienation machine?
Ideally, yes.
And can you tell me why that's, just as a matter of interest, why that is different from all the apps on my phone? Or is it not? Or is that the point?
In some senses, that's the point, but I think from looking at human psychology, they ultimately realized there was still a need for something an object that represented the golden potential of learning.
And is it a retro?
So in a sense, it's still like the book idea.
Okay, so it's
but
a retro.
Ultimately, it's opening up to a much deeper world.
Okay, what date?
This is going to take a while. So, optimistically, 2100. Right?
Optimistically, this is. Do you think we'll still have? We're post up 2100, I guess. That's okay, right? Okay. Okay, last one.
Can we do more than one?
Yeah, of course. Yeah.
I think you can do it together.
I'll start with this one, which is this is an example of one of the world's first adaptive biscuits, or in fact adaptive foodstuffs. When I went to the vending machine and put my money in, put my credits in. I didn't make a preference, it chose the food stuff for me, because it knew at this time, this was developed for initially to helping people like me with diabetes. It knew that I had a low blood sugar level, so it's actually picked out one of my favourite digestive biscuits. However, this could also, with the information that it has stores about you and your biometric patterns, and for instance any medication that you require, can serve me up with exactly what I need at that point in the day. So this is not only saving lives, it's good for me as a parent as well, because I can now safely give my daughter her pocket money, her credits, and rather than going with what she wants, she gets a very nicely flavoured version of what she actually needs at that point in time. So it's quite revolutionary, and it's very clever. Part of it happens in the machine, and part of it happens in the food stuff itself, which are molecularly engineered. There we go. And part of the thing that makes this work is our second.
Okay, yeah. All right, I'm already terrified at the panoptical parenting power that's been on display here. Right.
It's actually up here. This is what has become known as a privacy sacrificer. And it is actually on every surface around the world. Now, it started off because people were prepared to sacrifice their privacy to be part of an entertainment game, but also for security purposes. Because the world was getting crazy with stuff, actually, Big Brother was one argument against this, but actually it was deemed that to make it safer, we needed this. So entertainment channels have come out of this, voyeurism has come out of this, but we've been watching sex and murders on TV live now for many years. We've gone past that, and we need to civilise. And what's actually happened is certain countries said, right, rather than just have an individual saying, I'm prepared to sacrifice my privacy for the benefits that I can get, because all my relatives just on their hand can just see anywhere. So through GPS, this is like the ultimate micro GPS on every surface. And some countries then started to say, for the safety of our country, we are imposing this. If you want to live in this country, you have to sacrifice privacy. But actually that saved lives. So, my father-in-law, who fell over, right, and was on the floor of his house for over 24 hours, that would not happen now. But he has sacrificed his privacy so that his relatives, and even if his relatives aren't there are people that can alert. Linking into Mike's thing, his daughter, right, she sacrificed her privacy so she can be cared for, so she can be secure. Right. This actually, is here really in the next 15 years.
Fantastic. Thank you. I think that's. Was there one more? Is there any more?
A bit further.
Oh, one more. Okay, great. Great. Oh, yes, please. Something organic. Thank God.
Because it doesn't just see.
Is this part of the same matrix of horrible possibilities? Okay, right.
Hello, everybody. Hi.
Hello.
Okay, well, so so we're in 2100, and this is actually the first plant-human communication. This is the first example of first plant-human communication, because we discovered in it was 2045, I think it was. We'd already obviously established the communication with the other animal species on the planet. We'd actually begun to be able to engage in true dialogue with those other species. And then came the revolutionary understanding of the oleogenic energy field, which wasn't known until then. And we recognised that actually not only animals but also plants have a sentience. And we began to understand that we could actually communicate with plants. And this is the first plant life form, cacti, particularly high up in the sentience chain within the flora of our planet. So cactus was a good, was first one we chose to talk to.
Right, okay.
And that happened only, quite recently, because it took quite a long time for us to be able to, engage with the energy field properly. So it actually didn't, the first conversation happened in actually 2082. So it's, we've obviously learnt a huge amount, so much from plants till then. since that point.
By which time that had
Oh yeah,
advanced
by which that point.
so that it could actually detect human emotions and feelings through various sensors. So it actually knew when the cacti wanted to conversation.
So is this us becoming part of
Exactly,
Gaia's
and then we're all part
prefrontal cortex, neofrontal
Now,
cortex?
because Biscuits have started to say that they don't want to be eaten.
So Bruno Latour is God in 2020 and 2080. That's
Thank you.
fantastic.
Wait, here's for the cactus. Get around
Here's for the cactus.
Thank you.
Well, that's fine. I wanted to ask you how did it feel to simulate talking about the future via an object? I mean, in a sense, one of the things I'm trying to do with this event is to kind of get away from the idea that, you know, the hubris of the expo, you know, or the World Trade Fair, or the World Tomorrow in 2050 as seen from 1950, where the technology doesn't work after 2 days. So I'm trying to get at it in a kind of behavioural way. So I'm just interested to what, you know, what does it feel? I mean, you're obviously
I think
being...
as an academic, you feel a little bit put on the spot because obviously you're meant to be kind of some kind of expert. So I think it's always quite hard.
What is your specialism?
Psychology.
Psychology.
Yeah, I find that anyway. I felt it instantly. I was like, oh no, I have to be good at this or else I'm. Do you see what I mean?
Yeah,
because
yeah.
we're here, you know, we're all coming.
But you're a psychologist, and
Yeah.
you decided your vector in the future was a kind of expanded
Consciousness.
consciousness.
Yeah.
And the obvious thing to do was to see, well, what's a boundary between one
Well, the first
realm and
thing-
another realm that I would want to cross in order to
Yeah.
be doing a future act or
Yeah.
playing around with the future. So that was the obvious thing that you do.
Well, the first thing was life after death, but I couldn't think of an object which would break that boundary. You know, if we were actually, you know, this is the first person who communicated with their ancestors in a psychologically controlled experiment, so that we could see what was happening.
Can I just interesting? What is your specialism?
I'm a sound engineer.
Sound engineer. Okay. And your thing was the biscuit. And are you diabetic?
No, but it's weird. I was just I remember a story from when I was a kid. There was a footballer called Gary Mabbott who used to play for Tottenham.
I remember getting
Who it was in my mind forever about how his digestive biscuits saved his life because he was a footballer and because he was doing all the exercise. He had a very regimented thing about when he had to eat a digestive biscuit as well as all of his injections and things like that. So he had a sort of biscuit nanny. And I was just thinking, shall I have another biscuit? And then that sprung into my head, and then, you know, the idea of an automatic biscuit nanny saving footballers' lives in the future.
So biscuits are essential to transdisciplinarity.
Of course, and that's why they're here. They're not here by accident, are they?
Nothing is.
and they're round. And they're round.
And the what you were saying about how did it feel? Well, a sound engineer, recording musician as well, so I quite like jamming. Picking up a few notes and jamming with it is kind of what I tend to do with a lot of subject matter that I cover, because it's not really, sometimes it's more about getting the idea across than actually what the idea is.
But then I know sound engineers, and sound engineers operate on that vector. They also operate on the idea of trying to get something well recorded.
Yeah.
And so therefore they have to be on top of quite precise parameters and quite precise. Well, it depends on the musical form, of course, but you go from complete ersatz fakery simulation, looking at a waveform coming out of a sample or a MIDI or whatever, to how do I actually, someone's in a room vibrating with an instrument. So there's an interesting thing there about...
There's two things, whether I'm on my own or whether I'm with other people. Because on your own, you just do that thing, you know, with the waveform.
Yeah.
But when you're with other people, you're getting the best out of them.
Yeah.
You're necessarily getting the best out of the noise.
Again, the reason why I'm asking is again, it's quite self-interested. You're a bit of a control group actually, but because one of the things I want people to come out from this conference is with a sense that they can tie their practice in life, their specialism, their occupation, their craft to some kind of path of development, you know, for some sector going forward. So I just think it's quite. I think it's the old parlour game of you think of an animal, think of a second animal, think of a third animal, and the first animal is your super ego, the second animal is your ego, and the next one is your id. You know, the third animal is the one that you really are. So it turns out people think they start out being cougars and they end up as marmosets, or the other way around. You know. So it's, no, that would have taken us too long. But I nearly did it. I nearly asked you for your best case scenario, your worst case scenario, and your what you think is actually going to happen. So that's another way to sort of do it as well. Who else? Your specialism is
music technology, composition, audiovisual work.
Right. Okay. So cognate, but not. Yeah. Okay. And again, it's that relationship between personal investment and the future. So I'm not surprised that the two musicians are grasping onto the idea that a piece of tech can have a kind of essential humanistic kind of input.
You know, thinking about teaching, a great deal lately, and the idea of what does mass customization mean if it comes into the teaching field, and what do we really need to be able to optimize the potential of so many students who don't really fit with the university structure.
Yeah. Who don't? What does that mean? Just elaborate on that a wee
bit. That don't have or perhaps have lost the kind of intrinsic motivation that would lead them to flourish in university structure now. But what can find that intrinsic motivation that's in them, grab onto that and draw on that to bring them to their fullest potential. Whatever that, how do we know based on genotype and whatever what those range of potentials is for an individual?
And is the device a way of finding that out because it is an intimate device, and because it is a device? Because obviously one of the great anxieties about social. I mean, I mentioned the kind of the anxious dimension on the radical animal thesis. As people who believe that we are. It's the bad end of cybernetics. That we are just in a loop that is leeching away, or giving over to large, implacable systems who don't really care for us, as H.G. Wells said in War of the Worlds about the Martians. But your vision was that this is a kind of, one can be paranoid about this rather than paranoid about it. That there's a sort of sense that we can have these systems conspiring in our favour, data mining us in a
one of those strands in learning outcome is increasing the capacity for true caring, true conversation and connection with others. Right? We've identified how to get people of a very wide personality types there.
But just with your object, I thought that it's quite interesting the extent to which we're already kind of there. There's a discernible trajectory in terms of the actual affordance and design path of smart computing. But I just think it's dead interesting what emotions and what kind of aspirations are sort of piled onto it through asking people to tell a story, about a convincing story about a certain point in the future where they will be, or one might imagine they might be.
Taking that imaginative idea, saying somebody that discovered an object is still important. Of course, for me, this is part of Neil Stephenson's Diamond Age.
Yeah.
It's just absolutely mind-blowing experience. But that idea, here's this actual physical book, beautiful cover, is still a place where the heart lies in the education, and not in this abstract face.
Yeah. My favourite thing, if you go to Scarabray in Orkney, they have these religious objects. You get them online, but they're essentially, they look like PlayStation 3 controllers. It's like this. And it's like a three-legged, they don't know whether they're toys or religious objects or fertility objects, but there's one that sort of goes like that and goes down the middle and is cross-hatching between the three spikes. It's a network controller, basically, but it's sitting there as an artifact in the middle of this kind of way. And just, what is your specialism?
I'm a non-academic. I'm an entrepreneur, and I've got several businesses.
Okay, and what are you doing?
One's a software business. One's a training consultancy around people that make a difference through the way they think.
Okay.
On that, so I study questions basically, and so I just looked at things and used a technique called flooding to ask loads of questions rapidly in my mind, and some answers would come up. So questions like, "But what don't I know the purpose of in this room?" And it was that round thing.
Great question.
So I said, okay, so what could be the biggest benefit for the world? Save lives and peace. So that came out of that. So then you go, well, how possibly could a round thing save lives and peace? Well, it has to see things and record things, and then what's the commercial value of that, and how could you scale it? It was just a series of questions.
But your terminus was quite scary.
Well, that's it in my head. I'm going, you can do this.
But I could feel the prickle in the back of my neck of your panopticon. You know, your kind of the society of many eyes.
But then I thought, where would it come from? And you think about the reality phenomena of the last 10 years that we didn't know about 15 years ago. Where's that going to go in the future? The fact that lots of young people want to be stars and stuff like that. So what's the trade-off between that?
No, but as an entrepreneur, I think one of the phrases that courses around these discussions is possibility space. What's the possibility space? But I think it's quite interesting. Entrepreneurship or enterprise, and what it sort of implies conceptually. I mean, this is interesting me from kind of the play end of things, because one of the kind of the older definitions of play, from Plato, but from Huizinga as well, is taking reality lightly. So it's not that play is a fantasy state. It's not that it's an illusory state. It's sort of taking reality lightly. It's sort of ontologically making things mobile and creative and fluid, you know. So I mean, I just think it's quite an interesting, quite functional to the entrepreneur, but not going too far ahead, because this is the interesting thing about entrepreneurship and that whole thing about invention and innovation is, the innovation is kind of the application of invention, as it were, you know. So it's quite interesting. I find that quite interesting that you would have this kind of almost touch, in quite a mammalian way, it has to be said, I mean, one of the things that Panksepp talks about in the new book, The Archaeology of Mind, is that the basic emotional system is the seeking system. And seeking, the organisms basically seek knowledge to establish their boundaries vis-a-vis the world. And play is the kind of at the other end, that's the kind of the enjoyable end of it, but the essential emotional system is a sort of, and which you can observe in slime molds and other forms of kind of bounded organism, is actually what is inside here, what is outside here, and how do I take pleasure from figuring out the kind of the boundaries of that, Very interesting. Thank you very much. Nice bunch of guinea pigs for Future Fest and a session I'm going to run in September. The one thing I would like just to say at the end is that one of the legacies that's supposed to come out from this for Nesta, which is trying to justify itself and justify its existence, is that it can sort of become pedagogical about futurology and future thinking. So I'm really just here. I'm here to deliver what I've delivered, but I'm also here to kind of open out and make an offer just to people to stay in touch with the website and to stay in touch with me. And I think the object thing was interesting, just very, very useful to see how people react to that. And but I think I'd quite like to kind of tell quite fruity stories about each of the objects. What I'll do the next time, I think, is I'll try and tell fruity or more emotional stories about each of the objects, and maybe get people to kind of role play or dramatize it, or emotionally invest in it a wee bit more, You're thinking I almost did enough emotional investment, and I didn't want to do any more. Yes, so that's basically, I suppose that's a good way to end the day. Is there anything else that anybody wants to add from or ask about anything that I've presented today? I'm more than happy to let you go. Is it 4? Are we done? 10:02? We can get you away early.
Do you have a blog? Or
I do. Well, I have a variety of blogs, as one does. www.theplayethic.com, www.radicalanimal.net. And patkane.info as a sort of general portal. I know both Radical Animal and the Play Ethic are constantly updated tweets, Twitter accounts as well.
So Pat, in 20 years' time, what do you believe your future?
Personal future?
Yeah, holds.
I actually was asked to write this down.
Well, you made your predictions.
I made my predictions, but not my personal future.
That's right.
It's a different question. I will be 68. I honestly think that it will be quite a socially tense environment that I'm living in. Everything that I hear about the impact of climate change on the southern hemisphere and what that will trigger in terms of migration, large movements of people trying to get out of inhospitable zones, makes me think that to be a Northern European in that environment, and particularly to be actually, if I was in Scotland, which Marette Cohen's book Turned Out Nice says is going to have we're going to have the most temperate climate in the Northern Hemisphere. We're going to be in a very, very difficult circumstance. And I think if I wanted to bend my efforts towards anything over the next 20 years, it would be to kind of completely invest in leapfrogging technologies for the emerging economies and the developing world. I think it's incredibly important that they don't go through the smokestack. As much as possible, don't go through the smokestack era. And so I think there's almost like a kind of a Marshall Plan or a UNESCO of things, if not an Internet of things, that of technologies. I mean, if I wanted to be involved in something now, and I'm thinking about it through Scottish context, that would make 20 years from now livable, I think it would be that, And I think I will be trying to avail myself of as many rejuvenating technologies as I could possibly manage. because I've got four more lives to live, and I'm not very good with that spiritual dimension that says you should really stop and let other people carry on. I've got too much to do,
So do you have any personal thoughts about the whole life extension thing? Because last year I interviewed somebody who plans not to die.
Yes.
And she signed it for cryogenics and with her head, But when I interviewed her, I said, okay, so your plan A is to be frozen and have your body rejuvenated. And she said, no, that's plan B. Plan A is not to die. So she's part of the Californian movement.
Sure.
People who are kind of trying to tune up their bodies now so that they never die. And I thought that was a fascinating way to think because, here am I entering my 60s, you start to think about, okay, I'm probably going to die. but to be actually thinking, I don't plan to, never die, is, I think, fascinating. I wondered if you had any thoughts on that.
Well, I just there's a magazine, New Scientists have started up a science fiction magazine called ARC. It's like an e-magazine, and Simon Ings is the editor, is very involved with Future Fest. A good third of the stories, science fiction stories in that, are about not so much longevity as kind of the Kurzweil idea that we will be able to that consciousness is information patterning, and that that we will have a variety of relationships between incarnation and consciousness, and that's that we will. A lot of the stories work on the idea that people are being uploaded, but they're not quite sure where they're existing, in what realm, if it's believed that consciousness can be as a computational pattern, and can be Henry Markham from the Big Blue project, who's going to be in the event, believes that you can create a brain, an electron brain with enough neuronal density to kind of emerge a consciousness. Then we get into the matrix questions there about what it is to be a self experiencing a world. Now it could be. And what it is to be alive, what does sensuality mean? What is the neuronal correlate of a sensual experience, or blah 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 blah. So it could be that we have a realm of artilects, consciousnesses that incarnate in various ways, and it need not just be in flesh. It can be in silicon. It could be some kind of distribution of perception across a range of devices, whatever it is. So Once I went to a conference in America with Ray Kurzweil, and there's a documentary on him called Transcendent Man, and there's a scene in it where his impetus for believing that the consciousness is computational and is about pattern recognition and can be uploaded, is a great and grand grief about his father, who was a working musician and composer in Hollywood in the 50s and 60s, and who was never home, but who left a gigantic archive of materials, notes, scribblings, scores, pictures, so forth. Ray Kurzweil has every single artifact that his father ever generated in a gigantic vault, and he aims to bring his father back as a pattern of information that will eventually, if they can figure out the cognitive, the emergent generative cognitive structures, will emerge his father again. And there's a scene in it where he's at the father's grave, tears are coming down his face. He's saying, well, classic autistic nerd, I don't know why I'm crying, I don't know why I'm crying, you know. So I put my hand up and I said, do you think you have a case of womb envy, you know, as opposed to penis envy, you know? Because the whole idea, there was just this whole discourse about how we will be able to kind of, you know, birth men, the technoculture, be able to birth these consciousnesses and birth these processes, you know. But there's something very poignant, very ancient about that. His previous book is called The Age of Spiritual Machines, you know. So you know, and so there's a whole question there about what passes the Turing test, when, under what conditions, what does it mean when it gets past the Charlie Brooker Black Mirror thing. I thought brought that to a head brilliantly in the first episode, where the loved object might have just enough emotional response to give you a sense of being with someone, you know, and then you get into all these fantastic sociological questions about how routinized our consciousnesses are anyway, you know, in a genuine sort of Weberian sense, you know, how automatic and how routinized are we actually as individuals, you know, how much does it actually require for something to pass the Turing test in a bureaucratized, overly managed, you know, alienated, labour divided society, you know?
It's that uncanny valley thing that's the problem, isn't it? Because how close can you go before it becomes strange, you don't want to go any further? And maybe we'll see that move, the uncanny valley border, as to something that's almost human but so not quite human that it makes you cringe.
But a dog, I never had a dog in my life until my ex brought a dog into my daughter's family, you know, and looking at a dog as a kind of affective robot, you know, is really very illuminating. You know, I mean, it basically it's I look at it as this kind of, you know, emotionally driven small machine running on a few programs. You know, it's not unimaginable that's the kind of point at which we get to be surrounded by conscious entities at the pet level, or at the kind of beast of burden level. I don't know if you've seen the video of Boston Dynamics, who are one of DARPA's sort of great white hopes, but they have a series of videos on. We should probably stop now, but they have a series of videos on YouTube of what they call their big dog robot, and it's basically a horse. It makes the most incredibly appalling noise that will carry materiel into battle, and they take it out onto a frozen lake, and to demonstrate how brilliant their ergonomic planning is, they kick it in its forelegs and its back legs, trying to make it fall over, and it does this and stabilizes itself and manages to kind of struggle across the ice, struggle up a very difficult hill, struggle, it makes it. My reaction to that is completely pathetic, empathetic. You're thinking, it's not a sort of fearful, it makes you look at the inelegance and the sheer struggle of it to be in the world as an incarnate creature. Makes you respond like a parent to a child, you know, or like a carer to a weakling, you know. So it's to me that's a very interesting. And in Japan they've got that whole thing going with the care robots and all the rest of it. So I think there's a lot of dynamics to explore there.
Android. Anybody seen Android? That just breaks my heart every time. they remove his, he's an android, and they remove his moral governor, and so he turns into the kind of, you know, killing machine that we all assume androids.
Yeah.
His disorientation when they take out his moral governor, it makes me want to cry every time. Because it's all about how do you interact with people, how do you be in society, and if they take that away, you're totally confused.
And there's a robots' rights agenda. There will be a robots' rights agenda in the way that there was a slaves' human rights agenda, in the way that you know, it's Athenian democracy wasn't enough. There's absolutely no doubt that will come down the line.
Sacrificer, it wouldn't have allowed it. People would have seen it and then have rushed it to stop it happening.
It's true.
Well, I have to say, years ago I read a children's story called Vermin that was about household robots that are chucked out at the end of their useful life, but they keep coming back. Very sad.
Right, thank you, Pat. Enjoyed it.
Thank you.
Well, thanks very much for having me. Thank you. Thank you very much for having me.